Is beginning a salvage operation to recover the cutter Mesquite. I'll have the latest developments in the story at 6 o'clock.
The operation begins on the Mesquite aground off Keweenaw Peninsula.
And Good evening. Crewmen aboard the abandoned Coast Guard cutter Mesquite are headed to port tonight.
They were rescued early this morning from the cutter, which ran aground off the Keweenaw Peninsula.
A passing ship picked them up after some tense moments. Andrew Wittenberg and photographer Steve Eberhardt toured the scene by plane.
The cutter Mesquite and its crew of 53 were doing winter maintenance work around 2 a.m. this morning near Keweenaw Point when their mission came to a sudden, frightening end. The 180-foot booby tender ran aground on a rock ledge less than a mile from shore. With a large hole in the bottom of its bow, the Mesquite put out a mayday call at 3:30 a.m. But as the cutter continued to take on water, the commander ordered his ship abandoned at dawn. Crew members waited for rescue on Lake Superior in their lifeboats.
Everybody was evacuated because of the danger of the ship sinking, so that everyone was evacuated. The 3 injured crewmen were taken aboard the Hilo where a flight surgeon observed it all.
The rest of the day, the cutter as it was pulled up on the shoal to keep it from sinking in deep water off the ledge. But officials decided to start a salvage mission anyway. A damage assessment team is expected at the scene this evening. In the meantime, the Mesquite crew members will arrive in Duluth late tonight.
The rest of the crew plans to be stay on board the carrier and brought in here to Duluth, where transportation and housing and all that stuff will be taken care of.
All right.
Andrew Wittenberg joins us now to talk more about the story. 3 people were injured. What's the extent of their injuries?
The reports we have from the Coast Guard that they were airlifted to a hospital in Houghton. One suffered from an apparent heart attack, the other a broken arm, and still a third from psychological stress as a result of the accident at sea today.
Why weren't they able to get the salvage operations underway earlier today?
They actually did try a salvage operation this morning. They had a salvage person on board the Mesquite, but found it was far too dangerous to have this person on board with it kind of not in a safe situation. Later this afternoon, we spoke through our pilot on our plane with the Coast Guard helicopter. When they decided, in fact, to salvage it, they hoped, again, to have a crew there this evening to start assessing exactly what needs to be done to get it out of there.
And the crew members are on their way to Duluth right now on board that vessel that picked them up.
As you can see through the video, we saw the freighter, and they are on their way at this hour.
Okay, we'll have more on that on News 6 Nightside at 10 o'clock.
When the Mesquite ran, several very weak areas were discovered in the plating of her hull. Late today, the chairman of the Coast Guard Congressional Navigation Subcommittee said the Mesquite situation should serve as a warning that Congress must move quickly to replace the nearly 50-year-old buoy tender fleet. Congress is looking at appropriating money to replace the fleet of 180-foot buoy tenders which were built in Duluth. A bad accident had to travel nearly a mile from their crippled ships to the safety of the Indian vessel Bengal. Although the seas were fairly calm, it was very dark.
I understand there were some injuries, not really sure how severe.
Yeah, they're relatively minor, maybe a sprained elbow or something like that. There were a couple evacuations with the helicopter.
Initial reports have the vessel is pretty banged up, John. Do you think it's salvageable?
I don't know. It took some pretty good banging on the rocks when we were, because we were on the vessel for probably 2-3 hours.
The Bengal is expected to arrive in Duluth around midnight with its extra cargo of 45 Coast Guardsmen. Officials at the scene of the grounding say it's too soon to say if the Mesquite can be salvaged. Her entire engine room is underwater.
Tonight in the Twin Ports, they are on board the Indian vessel Mengal Desai. That ship is scheduled to take on grain here, then depart for Italy. Well,
and a Duluth Coast Guard crew is on the scene in Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula tonight, trying to save a Coast Guard cutter after it smashed into rocks there. Good evening, I'm Michelle Lee.
And I'm Darren Danielson. KDLH News is next.
And by Superior Computer.
Are on their way to the Twin Ports at this hour.
We are aboard a commercial freighter which is due into Duluth about 12:30 tonight. I think there are 52 aboard, and they're all coming here. They're going to be put up at a hotel here.
Members of the Mesquite are aboard the Indian Salty Mengal Desai. 3 of those members were injured when the vessel ran aground. Tonight's Duluth.
The U.S. Coast Guard plans to use scuba divers to assess the damage to a 180-foot cutter that ran aground today in Lake Superior. Earlier, 3 crewmen aboard the cutter were treated for injuries, and now the biggest concern tonight seems to be leaking diesel fuel. Colleen Burns has more on that story.
This is where the Mesquite ran aground earlier today, just off Kawina Point, and that's where efforts are now underway to contain an oil spill.
We have information that one of the fuel tanks was punctured in the accident, and that there is some fuel oil leaking. The Marine Safety Office in Duluth is heading up the pollution response to abate any spread of any of the diesel getting into the water.
The crew of the Mesquite first grew worried early this morning when waves on the lake swelled 6 feet or more. That's when the vintage cutter hit a submerged ledge, and all 50 crew members were rescued with helicopters. Now efforts are turned to the ship, and a crew has just arrived to look her over.
There'll be our on-scene platform. Keep us advised of the status of the vessel. Right now, Captain Hobaugh, the group commander, is the on-scene coordinator for the salvage effort. The crew is safe. The people are being treated at the hospital, and right now we're concentrating on efforts in the salvage plant.
Colleen Burns, KDLH News.
Workers are expected to float booms tomorrow around the ship to contain the spill. There is still a small concern the ship, which is perched on the ledge, might sink, but a Coast Guard spokesman says there's no real threat of that.
Well, tonight the Duluth City...
Live from the news leader of the North, this is Eyewitness News at 10 with Dennis Anderson.
Good evening, everybody. 53 crewmen from the U.S. Coast Guard buoy tender Mesquite are en route to Duluth. After the vessel ran aground early this morning, Coast Guard officials are not speculating about the cause of the accident, but as Karen Sunderman reports, they are involved with the cleanup.
The Mesquite's usual duties are suspended. Stuck on the rocks within a mile of the Michigan shore, the Mesquite buoy tender is waiting for salvage crews to help her into port.
We have just some preliminary damage reports in the vessel. There's enough holes in there where she settled to the bottom.
A 3-person team from Duluth is on the scene. Their job to control any leakage of the Mesquite's 30,000 gallons of fuel oil. Ironically, the vessel's seasonal duties include ice breaking, but a change in the weather will hamper the Coast Guard's salvage efforts.
That vessel has to get out of there and salvage pretty quickly. It's going to ice up there within a short period of time, and we get a good storm blowing through there. It could do a lot more damage than has already occurred to the vessel.
The physical damage to the Mesquite's crew appears light, with 3 treated and released from a Michigan hospital. But when the crew arrives in Duluth, their mental health will get some attention.
Single people especially live on board the ship, and they lost everything. You know, it's wet. Okay, I won't say it's lost, it's there in the ship, but it's wet. And also very important is they lost their ship, and you become very attached to your ship. It's a very, very close part of you, and you lost your ship. And there's a lot of things that are going through people's minds, so we're going to be here to help them.
In Duluth, Karen Sunderman, Eyewitness News.
And another ship ran into...
The Mesquite's crew of 53 was forced to abandon ship as the engine room flooded with water. Andrew Wittenberg has more on the investigation and the crew.
After spending yesterday on board the Indian bulk freighter Mangal Desai, the Mesquite crew finally arrived in Duluth early this morning. For the crew of the Mesquite, their final few hours on Lake Superior was spent in wet uniforms. Some of the crew members didn't even have shoes. So one of the first things they received when the Mangal...
But little is being said about the cause of the accident at this hour. Today, our John Schottel talked to some of the ship's crew about the accident.
Early this morning, the crew of the Mesquite set foot on dry land in Duluth, almost 24 hours after they were forced to abandon ship. And although the ordeal at sea was behind them, the memories of the shipwreck were still fresh in their minds.
There was a sudden jolt and a lot of noise, and there was no doubt in my mind that we had hit something, whether it was a reef or whatever it was, I didn't know, but I knew that we had hit something.
The ship had holes in at least 5 different compartments and were flooding. The whole lowest deck was flooded. There was no way to prevent the damage. We could not keep up with the flooding, and we felt it was in the best interest of the crew, the safety of the crew, to get them off at that point in time.
Abandoning ship is something most sailors in this day and age will never have to do. And when it does happen, it can be a crushing experience.
It's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. A ship is very important to all of us. We fought to save her. We did everything in our power to save her. And to actually have to get off the ship in a circumstance like that is something you never want to go through. And I don't think you can really put into words how we all feel about it, and having to get off our home, our livelihood, and leave it.
Today, the Coast Guard is picking up the pieces, trying to get crew members new clothes to replace the ones they left on ship, looking for the accident's cause, and of course, dealing with morale. According to Rear Admiral Richard Applebaum, investigators are just beginning to look for the causes of the wreck, but one lesson can already be learned from the accident.
This case, this accident, simply points out, I think very dramatically, the need to exercise the highest level of caution when operating on the water. I know that here on Lake Superior and in the Duluth area, there are a lot of people that enjoy the pleasures of boating and also earn their livelihoods in the maritime world. And for those people, I say, look at this incident, look at the tragic nature of the case, and please, please, please be careful on the water.
The future of the ship is now being determined by salvage experts on the scene of the accident. Mesquite and other Great Lakes buoy tenders are scheduled to be replaced by new ships in just 5 years. And if the Coast Guard finds that the repairs are too expensive, the Mesquite will have sailed its last mission. John Schottel, KDLH News.
Tonight, Coast Guard officials tell us that they are no longer worried about a possible oil spill from the ship. This morning, no oil slick could be seen near the grounded ship. Monday morning, they will tell you that the Mesquite was performing the most dangerous peacetime job there is, removing buoys from the water at night. Crew members from the Mesquite spent the day in Duluth talking to Coast Guard investigators. They also told KDLH News that abandoning ship was a dangerous and discouraging experience.
I had a slight fear in my mind. I don't know whether the captain considered it. I wasn't in the discussions I had with him. Was that the ship was sitting on the edge of a shoal, the possibility that the ship could turn over on its side, and that we have a more likelihood of losing more crew members.
I don't think you ever really think you're going to do it. It's vaguely in the back of your mind, but you never think that it's really going to happen.
The Coast Guard investigation of the wreck is expected to last 30 days. The Mesquite is by no means the first vessel to run aground off the Keweenaw Peninsula. In fact, the area has claimed a string of wrecks, including the first major shipwreck in Lake Superior history. That was back in 1844. Tonight, our Julie Zenner talks with a local shipwreck expert and reports on the Keweenaw Point's rocky history.
Its very appearance is menacing, jutting like a shark's fin from Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a potential ship captain's nightmare.
It's a point of land that has to be gone around, and that's one of its problems. Just the same thing with Isle Royale and the Apostle Islands. There are land masses that are in the way of direct shipping.
The Keweenaw Point is notorious for its shipwrecks, dating back to the first major shipwreck in Lake Superior history, the John Jacob Astor in 1844.
Actually, while it was at anchor inside Copper Harbor, the storm was so bad that its anchor chains parted and it went to pieces right on the reef in Copper Harbor.
Dozens of wrecks have followed, among the more prominent the city of Bangor in 1926, carrying over 200 new cars headed for Duluth.
All of the remaining automobiles were actually driven off the boat into the woods, out onto the ice, and into Copper Harbor and returned to Detroit to be refurbished.
In 1929 came the wreck of the Ralph Budd, now known as the Butter Boat.
A lot of her cargo was washed overboard, and among those things were huge tubs of butter. And so they were all along the shoreline, and she kind of got to be known as the Ralph Budd, the Butter Boat.
But since the 20s, the number of wrecks off Keweenaw Point have declined, with voice radios and radars now required on ships and refined weather forecasting. The point is no longer the threat it used to be, though Monday's accident is proof it can still be treacherous. Julie Zenner, KDLH News.
Duluth property.
What happened?
Salvage teams are on the scene to free the Mesquite, which is grounded off Keweenaw Point. They expect it will take a week to recover the vessel.
Now, News 6.
The cutter Mesquite are in their home port of Charlevoix, Michigan tonight. They left Duluth today on board a C-130 transport plane. They had been here 2 nights after being rescued from the Mesquite, which ran aground off Keweenaw Point early Monday morning. They will be on hold at the Charlevoix headquarters until they're interviewed for the investigation into why the Mesquite ran aground. They will then be assigned to other duties. Meanwhile, the Mesquite remains grounded. Nothing is being done to free it today because of bad weather. 30 to 40 mile-per-hour winds are blowing up 4 to 8 foot waves. Coast Guard officials say they're monitoring the situation and will begin the salvage operation as soon as possible.
From their home port in Charlevoix, Michigan. However, their ship is still grounded on a reef off the Keweenaw Point at this hour, and its fate is still up in the air tonight. John Schottel reports.
For the Mesquite's crew, this Coast Guard plane was a welcome sight this morning. It meant their homes and families were only hours away.
I'm glad to be heading home finally and all. I want to get the crew home to their families.
Meanwhile, on the Keweenaw Point, Coast Guard salvage crews are still working to save the Mesquite. At this time of year, calm weather doesn't last long. Today, gale warnings were in effect with waves from 10 to 18 feet high. And although winds are expected to drop off somewhat, 5 to 11-foot waves will still continue to hit the ship. Experts say that wave action can pound the ship on the rocks, causing even more damage. But so far, the Mesquite seems to be holding up.
The initial survey yesterday by the salvage divers indicated that there was no structural damage to the Mesquite. That was very good news. That means that the ship at this point appears very repairable. It may be 6 months before she's back in operation, but that's the initial plan.
The grounding of the Mesquite leaves the Coast Guard's Great Lakes fleet 2 ships short. That will change just before Christmas, when dry dock repairs will be finished on the cutter Sundew. However, this year's shipping season is expected to run well into February, and the Coast Guard says it may have to bring another icebreaker to the lakes to help with the workload. John Schottel, KDLH News.
Minnesota.
The crew of the grounded Coast Guard cutter Mesquite left Duluth around noon today. The group was in Duluth for questioning by Coast Guard officials who are trying to piece together the events of early Monday morning when the grounding took place just off Keweenaw Peninsula. The crew and Coast Guard officials departed the airbase on a C-130 headed for Houghton, Michigan, where the officials will continue their investigation of the accident. Meanwhile, the crew stayed on board, headed for Traverse City, Michigan. From there, they were bussed on to Charlevoix, Michigan, the home port of the cutter Mesquite. Meanwhile, at the scene of the grounding, work was hampered today by extremely poor weather conditions. The seas were swelling to 10 feet as the winds reached 40 miles an hour. Visibility was limited to 3/4 of a mile. Divers were able to make an inspection of the interior of the ship, although the results of that inspection have not been released by the Coast Guard. Earlier attempts to place a boom around the cutter were abandoned due to the bad weather. That's supposed to change by tomorrow, and officials hope an evaluation of the situation will allow them to begin salvage operations. One of the first things to be done is the removal of 19,000 gallons of diesel fuel now aboard the ship.
Says it's not certain whether the person had been on foot or snowmobile can be repaired. Today, a Coast Guard spokesman said the initial survey of the ship by divers did not reveal any apparent structural damage, and if a closer inspection at dry dock confirms those findings, the ship could be back in service in just 6 months. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard will have to decide if it has had enough ships, or it does have enough ships on the Great Lakes to tend the buoys and keep winter shipping channels free of ice.
It may be that someone is going to have to decide, will it be necessary to bring in a ship from somewhere else? Will it be necessary to maybe move in a ship from another part of the country to cover this area for a while, or some type of reevaluation?
The Mesquite ran aground on a reef near the Keweenaw Peninsula earlier Monday morning while it was servicing a buoy in a hazardous shipping area.
Searchers who
to replace the Guard's aging buoy fleet. Congressman William Tauzin of Louisiana says his subcommittee will hold hearings on the Mesquite's grounding and the buoy tender's fleet's condition early next year. Meanwhile, the captain of the Mesquite says his ship was racing against the threat of storms when it ran aground Monday. Commander J.R. Lynch says his crew was under a time crunch and working around the clock to remove buoys when the ship ran aground on Keweenaw Point. Divers are currently inspecting the ship to determine the extent of damage.
Board when she grounded on the reef in 12 feet of water. After the oil is taken off, more assessment will be done and the vessel will be freed, then moved to a shipyard to determine if it's worth repairing the 47-year-old cutter. Lake County authorities.
Coast Guard to begin offloading diesel fuel from the cutter Mesquite. 2 of the ship's fuel tanks contain hundreds of gallons of diesel fuel, and a center tank is filled with a mixture of fuel and water. That tank ruptured when the Mesquite ran aground off Keweenaw Point Monday morning. The pumping operation will continue through tomorrow. Then salvage experts will try to patch the damaged hull and tow the vessel to a shipyard. Lola
Municipal crews work on getting the Mesquite seaworthy once again, and temperature crews inspecting the grounded U.S. Coast Guard cutter Mesquite have determined the vessel was not as badly damaged as first thought. The cutter ran aground off Keweenaw Point in Michigan's Upper Peninsula early Monday. Divers have found several holes in the 180-foot craft, but less damage than expected. Crews began to remove 19,000 gallons of fuel from the Mesquite today. After that's finished, crews will then determine how to free the vessel and get her to a shipyard for repairs. The boat is sitting on a rock ledge in 12 feet of water. Statistics show elderly...
The stranded cutter ran aground early Monday in Lake Superior, less than a mile from Keweenaw Point. Since that time, crews have been trying to offload diesel fuel from the Mesquite's tanks. Officials are saying the Soo locks could stay open until February 15th if necessary. They say new speed limits set for freighters would eliminate many of the ice problems experienced in the past. However, there's no indication right now the shipping industry sees any need to extend the season. Waves kept the Coast Guard from removing diesel fuel from the ship once again today. They can't tow the ship to safety until that's done, and salvage crews repair the hole in the ship's bow.
Body was found on Friday. St. Louis County Attorney Mark Root.
It may be left on the rocks that it crashed on all winter long.
And it struck last Monday. An inspection yesterday shows new holes in the ship's bow and a leak in a second fuel tank. They say it's going to be difficult to salvage the ship, which is aground off Keweenaw Point.
Duration of teachers
of Lake Superior has now caused extensive damage to the Coast Guard cutter, which ran aground on the Keweenaw Point 1 week ago today. Coast Guard officials say the Mesquite is now listing 19 degrees to port, and damage to the hull is much worse than when the ship went aground last Monday. It now appears the ship may even spend the winter on the rocks off Keweenaw Point, and the salvage operation may not resume until spring. Virtually all of the Mesquite's compartments are either holed or cracked, and the damage may spell the end of the ship's 47-year career. 20,000 gallons of fuel oil is being removed from the ship today.
Computer product. About the fate of the Coast Guard cutter, which ran aground in Lake Superior last week. Coast Guard officials now say they're abandoning any plans to salvage the Mesquite until next spring. 10-foot waves crashed over the stranded vessel this weekend, tearing new holes in the hull, toppling its mast, and breaking its rudder. Officials now say virtually every compartment of the ship is either cracked or has holes in it. The ship is now listing 19 degrees to the port side, and there is talk of decommissioning the ship and declaring it a total loss. The Mesquite cost $894,000 to build in 1942. Replacement costs are now at $44 million.
Weather has pounded the Coast Guard cutter Mesquite further onto the rocks off Keweenaw Point. Due to crashing waves, more diesel fuel has spilled into the bay over the weekend. Divers and salvage experts were in the cold waters today inspecting the damage. If the Mesquite cannot be freed from the rocks soon, it may be stranded there all winter.
Members of
the conference caused so much damage to the Coast Guard cutter Mesquite that salvage operations have now been scrapped. The Mesquite ran aground 1 week ago on a rock ledge off Keweenaw Point, Michigan, and the crew had to be evacuated after the vessel floundered with several holes in its hull. Strong winds and waves over the weekend battered the vessel. The decision has been made to offload the oil and valuable electronic equipment. The ship, for all practical purposes, lost and then will not be picked up till spring. 2 people from
Mesquite will be suspended now until spring. The Mesquite went aground on a rocky ledge near Keweenaw Point on December 4th, punching holes in her hull and flooding the engine room. Last weekend, a storm pounded the 935-ton ship against the rocks, causing even more damage to the hull and making any salvage attempt this year impossible. Coast Guard crews plan to remove valuables from the Mesquite as soon as weather improves.
A 24-year-old Soviet...
Barbara Riles reports many experts are predicting a big push to lengthen the shipping season.
As the temperature drops and ice begins to build up on Lake Superior, shipping can become a treacherous business. The grounded Coast Guard cutter Mesquite off the Keweenaw Peninsula sits in mute testament to the dangers this time of year brings to mariners. But shipping experts say despite the potential hazards, an extended season is still a strong desire of many shippers.
And we have advocated a modest extension, or at least the option
for ships to go as long as there's a market demand and as long as weather and ice conditions permit.
A recent study by the U.S. Corps of Engineers examined the environmental concerns of extending the season into February and found only minor impact in most areas. The study did stress, however, a longer season would be dependent on the weather. The normal shipping season ends with the closure of the locks at Sault Ste. Marie on January 15th. But extra weeks of shipping could be lucrative to the shipping industry, allowing greater use of low-cost waterborne transportation to and from Lake Superior ports and a reduction in the cost of winter stockpiling. With this Corps report, the experts are saying they expect to see the push to extend the shipping season heat up once again. In Duluth, Barbara Riles, News 6.
Officials with the U.S. Coast Guard today officially suspended the salvage of the cutter Mesquite until next spring. The Mesquite ran aground near Keweenaw Point on December 4th, punching several holes in her hull. Subsequent bad weather on Lake Superior has caused even more damage to the 47-year-old Mesquite, making any salvage operation impractical for this year. Coast Guard crews will begin removing valuables from the ship and preparing it for winter as soon as the weather improves. It took 10. Legislation has just been passed ordering the Guard back to work. The order goes into effect tomorrow. The Coast Guard in Canada falls under the heading of civil servants and contract workers. Their strike has slowed shipping along the St. Lawrence Seaway as Canadian icebreakers have been sidelined. Just 2 days ago, the U.S. volunteered the use of one of its icebreakers to help in Canadian waters. Shipping officials hope the return of the Guard tomorrow will bring smooth sailing for vessels still making their way east.
A long winter off the Keweenaw Peninsula, and already a battle is brewing over the ship's sinking rights.
The Alger Underwater Preserve and the proposed Keweenaw Underwater Preserve both want to claim the battered Mesquite as a scuba diving attraction. Each preserve was set up to protect and promote Michigan's shipwrecks, and the Mesquite is just what each group has been waiting for. The Coast Guard has admitted any salvaging operation this winter is no longer possible, and there's considerable speculation the ship will never sail again. Even the commercial salvage handling the project says the Mesquite has a slim chance of surviving this winter.
The songs of the holidays. It's only the
officially given up on salvaging their ship, which ran aground near the Keweenaw Peninsula earlier this month. But already 2 Michigan groups are vying for the ship's sinking rights. The Alger Underwater Preserve and the proposed Keweenaw Underwater Preserve both want to use the battered Mesquite as a scuba diving attraction. The Mesquite ran aground near Keweenaw Point on December 4th, near where the Keweenaw Preserve is proposed. Both groups have been set up to protect and preserve Michigan shipwrecks, and the Mesquite is just what each group has been hoping for. Heavy damage to the Mesquite and the threat of winter storms has fueled speculations the ship will never sail again.
Iron Range supporters of Dave Foster fear tonight
being blamed for move to a shipyard to determine if it's worth repairing the 47-year-old cutter. Lake County authorities
for the new year.
And some answers to the grounding of the Mesquite. It looks like human error. Good evening. I'm Colleen Burns.
And I'm Darren Danielson. The early edition of KDLH News is next. The report out tonight says that a navigational error caused the cutter Mesquite to wreck off Lake Superior's Keweenaw Peninsula. Captain Martin Moynihan headed the preliminary probe into the December 4th grounding of the ship. He says that the Mesquite's crew made some minor mistakes that led to a big problem. The Coast Guard has ruled out drugs and alcohol as contributing factors in the accident. A final report and recommendations are due in about 2 months. Meanwhile, a Coast Guard spokesman says tonight that it looks like the vessel won't be replaced and that crew members will be reassigned to other Coast Guard jobs. Ocean. Something is responsible for the wreck of the Coast Guard cutter Mesquite.
And late word tonight is that the Soo locks are closing early this year, meaning over 1 million tons of taconite will be stuck in Lake Superior ports, including Duluth.
And the wait is over.
The night off. A Coast Guard captain says a navigational error caused the shipwreck of the buoy tender Mesquite.
On December 4th, the Mesquite ran aground on a reef off Lake Superior's Keweenaw Peninsula. Captain Martin Moynihan is heading the preliminary probe into the accident, and he said the Mesquite's crew made some minor mistakes that led to a big problem. The Coast Guard has ruled out drugs and alcohol as contributing factors in the accident. A final report and recommendations are due out in a couple of months. Meanwhile, a Coast Guard spokesman says it looks like the vessel won't be replaced and that crew members will be reassigned to other Coast Guard jobs. Ice problems